In this video, I want to show you the dangers of the Bible in the hands of someone who doesn't think they need any guidance to interpret the Bible. Of course, right away people say, well, no, we don't need guidance. We have the Holy Spirit to guide us. Well, let me show you where Kjvonly01, where his Holy Spirit led him to believe. He has a video up where he thinks that Melchizedek is God. And as I looked at the title of the video, I was thinking to myself, surely he doesn't believe this. This is some joke, isn't it? But after watching the video, that's exactly where the Holy Spirit of Kjvonly01 led him to believe that Melchizedek is God. And when I began looking, I said, surely someone is going to challenge him on this. But I looked through his comments, and no one challenged him on this. Not even the Bible of Traditions or Random 331 challenged him and let him know that Melchizedek is not God. So I guess their Holy Spirit led them to believe the same thing. So let's look at the dangers of this interpreting the Bible without any guidance. We're first introduced to Melchizedek in Genesis chapter 14. And Kjvonly01 uses chapter 14 of Genesis and Hebrews chapter 7. He gives some support verses, but they'll fall by the wayside once I show you that Melchizedek is not God. But anyway, we're introduced to Melchizedek in verse 18, where he says he's king of Salem. Of course, we know that Salem is ancient Salem is Jerusalem. And then if you look further down there in verse 19, notice where Melchizedek is giving Abraham a blessing, where Melchizedek, blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High." That's fine. Melchizedek giving Abram a blessing. Now then, look at verse 20. Melchizedek says, "And blessed be God Most High." Does anyone just see anything that just jumps out at you from that one verse there? Does anything just jump out at you now that you see it, maybe for the first time, Kjvonly01? What you have in verse 20, if you think that Melchizedek is God, then you have God blessing himself. Do you see that? It's kind of like, well, I've blessed Abram, just well, bless myself too, so God blesses himself. Do you see the wrongness in what you've done there? That one verse would have shown you, well, heck, God can't be blessing himself. He doesn't need a blessing from himself. So Melchizedek must not be God. But yet, apparently you didn't read that, or you would have stopped your video and came to another conclusion. So that one verse there alone just shows that Melchizedek is not God. And simply because the genealogy of Melchizedek is not mentioned here, doesn't mean that he didn't have one. And I'll show you the reason for that a little bit later. But anyway, let's move on to chapter 7 of Hebrews, where Kjvonly01 goes to give more of his conclusion that Melchizedek is God. Hebrews chapter 7 verse 3, talking about Melchizedek without father, without mother, without genealogy, having no beginning of days nor end of life. Kjvonly, simply because his genealogy is not given doesn't mean that he didn't have one. Now, if you'd have looked at verse 6, you would have seen that as well. But he, Melchizedek, whose genealogy is not counted, or whose genealogy is not traced. You see what he's talking about there? He's talking about Melchizedek. It's simply saying that his genealogy was not traced. It didn't mean that he didn't have one. The writer to Hebrews is making this clear when he says that his genealogy was not counted, and the word counted there means to be traced. His genealogy was simply not traced in Genesis, and it was done for a reason, which I'll show that in a minute as well. And you've got to consider this too. If you'd even considered this, you would have known that Melchizedek and God weren't the same. If Melchizedek were God, then the Bible would have said no genealogy. He wouldn't have said he didn't have a genealogy that was not traced. It would have said he had no genealogy, instead of saying that his genealogy was not traced. Surely you could have seen that if you'd have just looked at it. Again, there's another verse and another example showing clearly that Melchizedek is not God. Verse 11 talks about this. If therefore perfection by the Levitical priesthood For under it the people received the law. What further need would there be for another priest to arise after the order of Melchizedek, after the order, without beginning and without end? No genealogy, no mother and father, not because he didn't have one, but they were not traced. It was done to show typology, and apparently you don't understand biblical typology. We know that Jesus was without beginning and without end. He would become our high priest upon his death. And what the writer of the Bible in Genesis in Hebrew, and what God is trying to show overall, is the typology there, that Jesus would become our high priest after the order of Melchizedek, having no beginning and no ending. And we know exactly that is what happened. And why did the priesthood have to be changed is brought out in chapter 7, verse 12. For the priesthood being changed, there is made a necessity for change of the law. So remember, the Levitical priesthood had to come through the line of Levi. That was the Old Testament law. But now Jesus is not after that order in the Old Testament of the Levitical priesthood. So the law itself needed to be changed, which God can do that. And we know that order was changed when Jesus, the typology of Melchizedek in the Old Testament, became our high priest from the tribe of Judea. Is a new order of priesthood, not after Levi anymore, but after Jesus Christ. So don't you see typology being used there in the verses I've showed you, that it is impossible for Melchizedek to have been God? Surely you see that. But did you know, Kjvonly01, that Muslims teach something very similar to what you're teaching about God and about Jesus? Were you aware of that at all? Did you do any study to see that you're teaching something that is very close to what Muslims teach? Now, Kjvonly, let's see if you have any theological character to you, now that you have shown that your conclusion about Melchizedek being God is wrong. Surely you will not leave a video up misleading people and misguiding people. Surely you will not leave a video up saying Melchizedek is God when you have clearly been shown that Melchizedek wasn't God. I can't believe that any person who calls themselves a Christian will leave a video up where they purposely misguide people into believing the wrong thing. Of course, with just a little guidance, you would have known this, and it would not have been pointed out to you. Until next time, this has been Golly saying, God bless.